Hi everyone, Nemo here. Welcome to the final halftime show of the 192nd Annual General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm really excited tonight for various reasons. As most of you already know, there were some temple announcements that as a Brit make me very, very happy. We'll be coming to all that good stuff later. It was quite a session, and I think there's only one person that can help me with such a session, and that is Peter Bleakley, who I'm adding into the stream now before we get to our Jesus, Joe, and Russell. Peter needs no introduction, and we are ready to tackle what was arguably one of the most mental sessions of conference I think I've sat through in a little while. Yeah, we'll get our zen, we'll get ready. So, Jesus, Joe, or Russell, who do you reckon has won overall, Peter? Who do you reckon?
It's looking good for Jesus. I'm quite surprised.
Yeah.
You know, other times no. I mean, Joseph is off the radar now. Just too much historical baggage, which is a surprise as well. So I'm actually gonna nudge it for Jesus.
This session was 16 for Jesus, 13 for Russell.
Oh, close.
So it was a close race. But let's see what the overall numbers are. 56-7-40. So Jesus on 56, Russell Nelson on 40. Now, the breakdown of individuals that spoke about him and the amount of people that didn't mention Russell Nelson, I think it's less than 10 of the speakers in the entire conference didn't mention Russell Nelson by a quote. Which is something. Okay. It's quite incredible, really.
We'll never hear from them again. Those people are doomed.
They're being struck off. Well, I mean, Suarez was one of them, so maybe. And Uchtdorf. So Uchtdorf and Suarez, neither of them gave a our beloved president quote.
That's why he's not shaking Uchtdorf's hand.
Maybe. But, you know, we got some goodies from Uchtdorf, which we'll come to. But Henry B. Eyring was conducting, and right off the bat, we're thrown into Elder Oakes, who was a man unleashed tonight.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll just give a brief overview of the kind of major points that I saw, and then we'll dive right into the conversation. He said, God loves all his children, and the moment he said that, I was waiting for the but and the exceptions, which came thick and fast. He conflated doctrines and policies quite a few times.
And he said,
We'll come back, Peter. I'm going to do the. I'll do the run through. Don't worry.
Okay.
He conflated doctrines and policies. He talked about exceptions too limited to discuss here about children that won't, God's children, which won't wind up with a degree of glory. Talked about all should be judged. He gave a quote about all should be judged, which I can't find any reference for. A quote that doesn't actually exist as a quote. There was a lot of, if you can't abide the law, you can't get the kingdom, kind of can't handle the heat, get out the kitchen nonsense. He really went after the trans community with gender as eternal. And he said the family proclamation is not a changeable statement of policy, but is founded on unchangeable doctrine. That's an overview of what Oakes said. Now let's run through it blow by blow. Peter, please, crack on.
Well, this was amazing. So it was again, as soon as he said plan, I was like, yes, baby. You know, we've got another talk with plan in the title, which means we're all going to get lectured again about the same things. And he absolutely did. So there were several of his repeated mantras that got quoted again and a bit more assertively. And he seemed a bit plaintive at the start. He kept saying that people don't seem to understand it fully. And he's always like, you don't get it yet, do you? I'm going to lecture you again until you understand. And this is a key word here. What people like him mean by understand when they're in sort of that sort of mode is you don't agree with me, do you? If you understood it, you'd agree with me. And so what he means is people are still not agreeing with my focus here.
Yeah.
You know, that I think that's Oakes speak for you're not understanding me. And I think that was, you know, significant that he felt he has to keep hammering this home. So he must be conscious that there is pushback against his whole thing. And, you know, in a quick nutshell, he was brought into the apostleship in 1988, I think, around then, maybe earlier, no, 1984 even, I think, I don't know, with the immediate brief to plan the church's opposition to civil rights for gay people wherever it reared its ugly head. And that's been his religious mission ever since. And he's been very clear about that in all the talks with Plan in the topic. And I'm very curious to know how much of the pushback is actually from the other apostles, because they never join in. None of them go for it with this diatribe stuff. None of them have said the family proclamation is revelation. They're not as enthusiastic, and you almost feel that his audience isn't just the general membership who are very uncomfortable with a lot of this, some of them, but I think he's, one getting criminology, he's lecturing the apostles as well, and they're still not backing him up. And
he was brought in with the death of Legrand Richards and Marquis Peterson, which, a fitting replacement for Marquis Peterson is Dallin H. Oakes, I'd say.
Yeah,
in terms of tone.
Yeah. So I think this is fascinating that he's still trying to embed this as something that after he's dead, it cannot go away. He just keeps teaching this is permanent stuff. So if we go through blow by blow, so it starts off like trying to be the first, it's like he suddenly changed from robot to human and went, I love you, my brothers and sisters. I love all of God's children. And this sort of was kind of what he was meant to be saying at the University of Virginia that he went to talk about the church and LGBTQ issues. The point that it was flagged up as him saying, I've actually learned a few things. We're going to be softer as a church now on LGBTQ people. And then he screwed up in the Q&A, as we know, by just lying that there was no conversion therapy with vomiting and electric shocks at BYU on his watch. And that became the dominant message. So I was wondering if he was about to have another go at, we're softer now. I care about you. I do, honestly. But he's framed it all in his very rigid paradigms.
Well, it was all like, we're not bigoted. We just have a different perspective, essentially. It's like, we see things differently. So that doesn't make us bad. It just means we're different.
But he kind of wrote to help with this. And one of the things he's commented before is basically, well, there are the gay people and the transgender people, whatever. They can go to the other kingdom. Like he's literally taught before in one of these plan talks, there are other kingdoms prepared for them. So he kind of went there again. He's like, God's made kingdoms for everybody where they'll be comfortable, and the subtext is that's where the people pretending to be gay will go. And because they can't live the higher law of heterosexual marriage. And so that was quite intriguing. He's each time he fishes out an ingredient of this doctrinal worldview he's constructed. I thought it was interesting that he said we've got very little information about two of these three kingdoms, which is true. And he kind of excused it, saying, well, our purpose is just to focus on how you get into the top one, which again he said before. And he said, we're here to get people to exaltation. Everyone else can bugger off elsewhere. But he gave that talk where he was mocking the woman who asked, well, I'm a polygamous wife, am I going to have my own house? And he kind of jokes, well, actually, we have no idea. We don't know what's going on. Just trust that God's nice and it will all be fine.
You think he'd have a vested interest in knowing because he's a polygamist himself?
Yeah. Well, exactly. And
I just want to ask, just before you go on, I just want to ask the audience something. He gave a quote. He said, all shall be judged and every man shall receive according to his own works, was the beginning of the quote. Okay, I'll say that again. All shall be judged and every man shall receive according to his own works. Now, I did a quick search for that on the Gospel Library and on Google. Couldn't find a quote that is from. If anyone can let me know in the comments while we carry on talking about other oaks, please do, because I'd be really interested to know who he's quoting, because he said he was quoting someone and I want to know. So we're on to this bit where he said, if you can't abide the law, you don't get the kingdom. It basically makes it our fault for not getting there. Whereas if we have divine nature, why wouldn't be able to abide celestial law? Because he's talking about, you will only get what you can abide. It's like, well, if I have eternal nature, if I am a celestial being, then surely I will be able to abide celestial law. So why is there this idea that it's my fault that I don't make it there because I couldn't abide it? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's just all a mess. They're making stuff up. Like we are invited to sustain them as prophets, seers, and revelators. But as we've already heard in other sessions, we're also being told by Christopherson and others, well, don't ask. If you want to know more information, God has decided not to tell us. And all the time they avoid the massive elephant in the room of, well, why don't you ask then? If you really are, there's 15 of you, prophets, seers, and revelators. You say it is only your right to seek doctrine that's acceptable for the whole church and get revelation. We'll do it then.
Oh no, because Renland said it is arrogant and unproductive to try and ask for revelation.
Yeah.
So
and we have to wait on the Lord's
Just this
time. Well, what are
conference,
they
exactly.
expecting? Like to literally send an angel with a flaming sword uninvited? How did Joe? All of those men, all of them will have taught repeatedly over the years that revelations come in response to questions.
Yeah.
They'll have taught that. They'll have taught that's how Joseph Smith worked. But they're utter cowards. Their whole system for choosing themselves avoids revelation. It's just seniority as an apostle. They can't do it. They know that they don't get revelation. So their answer always is to stonewall, like, well, God hasn't decided to give us information. Yet they will have revelation up the get-go about the meetings that whether women or not are having their own session in general conference.
Yeah.
They'll
have so many revelations that they just flip flop, cancel.
Yeah.
They can't keep up with the amount that the Lord's telling them because they're asking him.
I was reading through the Handbook of Instructions recently. That thing is huge. It's bulging. And interestingly, the new sort of mantra that slipped in, and again with some other speakers as well, is doctrines and policies.
Yeah. He's conflating them now. Yeah.
Oakes said it several times that, knowing the doctrines and policies of God that God has established. So they're now treating policies as revelation, as doctrinal.
Well, it is Oakes himself who said, I don't know it's possible to distinguish between policy and doctrine in a church that believes we have a prophet. So,
which I agree with. I think that's fair,
But they try and hide behind it when they're being apologetic, right? They say, oh, well, that was just a policy. November 2015, just a policy. Just a policy.
All our lives, the number one apologetic excuse for past prophets teaching lies or things that got dropped later has been that was just a policy. The whole blacks in the priesthood every time I was told for decades, that's just a policy, not a doctrine, which is nonsense. So he's killed their one remaining fig leaf, and it's, as we've discussed before, well, the apostasy definition now, the definition of apostasy that requires automatic investigation and discipline by a stake president is opposing the church's leaders, opposing doctrines publicly, and opposing policies. So policies are treated like doctrine in this church. They're fundamental. You will be excommunicated if you publicly oppose them, as I have been.
No, you won't.
But none of them have been. Give it time. But none of them have. But absolutely none of them have been voted on by the church. We haven't done common consent authorization of any of them. You can ignore them all, everybody.
But then March 2020, as we've talked about, March 2020, this very man, Down Late Jokes, said that it is a practice that has been there since the beginning and is still practiced now, that doctrine of the church is voted upon by a common consent vote of the people. So where was my vote about the changes to the temple ceremony? Where was my vote about the November 2015 policy? Because I'll say policy, even though it's doctrine, because policy and doctrine, as he's saying, is the same thing.
Same thing.
So it doesn't matter.
So that was interesting that he used that language. That is a big innovation, this conference. They've not been so obvious about putting the two together. And this is just the final nails in the coffin of totalitarianism. There is no lesser level of anything. You will hear and obey. It is all from God, down to policies about toilet rolls in bathrooms if it has to be. You just take it all. The church, all of it, handbooks, policies, is your religion now. And if you disagree with any of it, you can go off to one of those other kingdoms. You're not in. We've heard from several speakers, that you have to be all in, as we'll hear from some other people later.
What do you think of this message? He said, exaltation is from obedience. I know it comes from marriage between male and female. But then, just before we get to that, sorry, I've skipped ahead of myself. He said, "We want to," and this is a direct quote, "we want to share our spiritual and temporal abundance with everyone." Poppycock.
Yeah.
Either they want to and something's getting in the way, which please tell me what it is
Yeah.
and we'll see if we can help you alleviate it. Or
Yeah.
they don't really want to, because if they did, they would.
We normally talk about temporal abundance, that they're hoarding money and not giving it to the needy. But spiritually, they shun whole categories of people, are excluded. You can't get into the temple if you're not in particular categories to receive those spiritual blessings. Yeah. So it's a double whammy, temporal and spiritual.
Exactly. I mean,
think
they
we should comment
withhold
on
spiritual abundance as well by refusing to receive revelation on matters of concern from people, right? They're saying that, oh, it's arrogant, we're not going to get a revelation about that and help you. So they're withholding that spiritual abundance.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
I think that little that comment you mentioned earlier, his caveat that everyone will receive a degree of glory with with exceptions too limited to consider here. Well, it's like, dude, this kind of matters. What he's referring to is sons of perdition
Yeah.
who commit the unforgivable sin of blasphemy against the Holy Ghost and can't have a kingdom of glory. But then he later quotes something where, everyone gets saved. And that's literally not doctrinally true.
No.
And he's already kind of put that aside. So it's always confusing with Oakes. I've described it as a layer cake. Like every time he tackles a tough subject, it will be a layer cake of contradictions, some lies, misquoting scriptures, and it can take hours to disentangle to try and work out what on earth he was meaning. But, he's pretty clear in what he was saying. And again, our purpose is exaltation. The doctrines and policies of the church are here to prepare us for the highest degree of glory. Yeah. So, that phrase got repeated a few times. He said there are others of kingdoms of glory, and God's quote saves all the works of his hands. So that's literally a lie. That in our religion, and he's already acknowledged the caveat of those who don't, but he just said God saves all the works of his hands. I don't. Maybe that's a quote from a
He also
scripture or
said
something.
something interesting. He said, opposition is so large because it's so important. It's a typical persecution complex, a thing cults often say. They're like, oh, people don't like us because we have so much of the truth or whatever. It's that old chestnut of people didn't like the early Mormons because they had the truth. It's like, no, people didn't like the early Mormons because they were scared of Joseph Smith taking their young girls to wife. They were worried about all sorts of things, right? It was a far more complex situation. So to say that, oh, well, there's opposition to our positions, not because the world's getting more progressive or more inclusive or more tolerant, but no, because our position is so important that the world must therefore oppose it.
And then that's his segue into religious freedom. So talking about our huge, religious freedom efforts around the world to be homophobic. And again, he used the phrase teachings and policies of the church sort of applied. And he referenced the enormous humanitarian aid that the church gives to non-Mormons with no ulterior motive of conversion. Yeah, right. Which isn't enormous, as we know. It's a microscopic percentage of the assets that they could deploy. I mean, I was just so annoyed earlier when they were describing in one of the previous sessions an educational effort used with, I think, quote, minimal humanitarian aid. So a tiny little bit of money was put towards it to educate 14 children in Congo who were without schooling otherwise. It's like they've got enough money to educate every child in the Congo and run some universities there. That's what they could do. And that would still be a tiny fraction of what they've got sitting in the American stock market, waiting to disappear at the next crash. It's again this drip feeding, this idea of scarcity, that in the church, the best we can do is little tiny things because that's all we have the money for. Anyway, so I just thought I'd comment on, the enormous humanitarian aid, keeping this mantra, which the members will then repeat. I hear it every other Sunday at church. Oh, we give huge amounts of humanitarian aid to people. And because they're just repeating this, no one's checking. They don't know who paid for it or what it actually is.
Unless you're in my ward or your ward, in which case we annoy people by saying, actually, let's get on to Ojidiran. Let's get on to the next guy. Because we could waffle on Oakes all day. This guy kind of gave an outline. Go on.
Yeah, sorry, just to finish on Oaks, apologies, just to get in, because it's important that he repeated his specifically homophobic and transphobic mantras.
Yeah.
He quoted the Family Proclamation: gender is an essential characteristic of mortal and immortal life, which means we must oppose changes that homogenize differences between men and women, or confuse or alter gender. So he's taken a flamethrower to the more progressive improvements in the General Handbook towards transgender people, including Friends of Us All. Our position provokes opposition. We must
He
oppose
also said
distorting.
he essentially said God made us oppose. He did that whole thing of saying like, look, we're just doing what God wants us to do. It's God's fault, right? Because whenever the church has to do something that puts them possibly on the wrong side of history in terms of social justice, they get to blame God. The priesthood ban. We don't know why God made us do it, and that's it really. So yeah, good point bringing
So he
that up.
said. So he's crystallized this. So he's got a threefold mission of the church now, which is oppose distorting marriage, which means oppose same-sex marriage, oppose discouraging childbearing. This is something he's brought back because the birth rate in the church has dropped. He knows this is a driver of growth. So he's shaming people who use contraception, or coming very close to doing that, and oppose confusing gender. And he says the plan will not be changed. So he's asserting this is here to stay. This is his baby. He probably wrote the Family Proclamation.
Yeah.
And he said the Family Proclamation is not a changeable statement of policy.
Yeah. But it's founded on
And
unchangeable doctrine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still hasn't been voted on by anyone.
No.
So I just wanted to finish that up because it's important to acknowledge how very specifically homophobic and transphobic he was in his language there. This is his vision for the church. This is the hill he wants us all to die on, and we will if we make that our vision as a religion, and it's already happening.
He's next in line to become the prophet, and as we know from our current prophet, they will just hold on to whatever they feel is significant until they get their turn in the chair. That's what Russell M. Nelson did with the name of the church. You just hold on to the hill that they want to die on. The next guy
we
got
to meet their sixth. Oh, sorry. Well, the next guy was
Ojudiran.
Brother Ojudiran from Nigeria. Very nice, sort of standard come to Jesus, faith, repentance, covenants, and
used the phrase covenant path 4 times.
Jesus, the sacrament, and the spirit are the battery for our car. So it's kind of nothing new there, but nice, basic stuff. From
the only other thing I'll say, because I do want to, there's nothing really to talk about, and we need to move on to the next guy because we'll spend hours on him. He said, "Here is 2 teachings of Jesus I want to speak with you." At no point then did he go on to quote Jesus, but he did quote Russell M. Nelson. And I think that is indicative of the way that Russell M. Nelson is viewed by General Authority 70s. He's like, let me teach you about Jesus. Russell M. Nelson said, right? So that's what we got from him, which I think is indicative. And then we got Klebingat. Now, Klebingat, I'm disturbed by what he said. He's like he's talked about the Savior being accused of being divisive, so that means we're in good company, obviously, because we get accused of that also. He gave a shout out to internal opposition. He was basically full of Christian persecution complex. He's saying the quorum, the 15 men behind him are good and honest. I can prove that about 7 of them at least are not honest. He talked about people like us. He said they use their intellectual reservations to cover their moral lapses, which is just a massive ad hominem attack on those that criticize the church. It was super fundamentalist. And he mentioned, he quoted Jesus the most, I think, out of anyone, actually. He quoted him 8 times in one talk. And he was using the Lord's name in vain in all of it, because he was using Christ's name in the name of Desnat fundamentalism, essentially. What did you think of that talk, Peter?
Right, Jörg Klebingat. Remember the name, because Oakes and Bednar are looking for the next Sith apprentice, and this was his audition, and he rocked it. So Desnat Goebbels, he is the propagandist for the Desnat wing of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's all about hyping up the leaders of the church as these supermen who are beyond all comprehension, amazing. All about absolutely not compromising on anything, which a few of the other speakers were saying as well. Like, you have to be all in. You can't pick and choose which doctrine or policy you are going to go with. It's got to be all or nothing. And he put an hour's worth of sound bites into like 10 minutes. So I had to keep pausing. I was getting writer's cramp trying to keep up with some of them. But wow. Wow. It was just like, wow. I mean, this wasn't a boring session. The others have been really dull. And I've been sitting there moaning about the people not bringing it in the way that our associate Britt Venger, Patrick Kieran brought it with passion. These guys have got passion. Unfortunately, it's for complete terrifying evil. But hey, it was interesting.
But it was passionate evil.
Our strength is being tested, and we will reap the sum total of our words and deeds.
He started out with, you reap what you sow.
Yeah. And you know, it's like thumping the pulpit. I mean, I'd love to know what his secrets are. No one could be that uptight without a massive amount of hypocrisy. We'll find out one day. But I thought that was significant because we've had other people, I think it's Christopher or someone was saying that there aren't angels counting every tiny little thing. You know, PD talks about that, and this morning in your conversation with him, that there was this sort of idea that no, it's kind of more general salvation. They're not counting every choice and sin you make. But he was saying, yes, there is. You know, you will reap the sum total of our words and deeds. And you know, it's going back to it all being recorded. He talked about so then he has to attack the enemy. The enemy is the weak, the compromising, the nuanced Mormons, the cafeteria Mormons. The adversary will rationalize commandments to meaninglessness. He talked about how Jesus was accused of being divisive, and his enemies sort of sifted through his words to try and trip him up and tangle. So this was clearly a reference to critics of the church who say people like Oakes are divisive. You know, they're not helping. They are dividing families and people. And he's saying, well, people accuse Jesus of that. You just have to suck it up. And we're, you know, here we are doing it. We are doing what he's described. We are picking apart their words, but we're just holding them accountable for their words.
When I went to a priesthood leader, and said, I'm worried that the leaders of the church are lying, that they're being dishonest. And one of the responses I got was, well, Jesus has also been accused of lying. You know, there's that time he said he was going to go to a feast and then didn't. Did he lie? I was like, if we got to this point now where we're having to just defend actions by saying, well, you know, Jesus lied at one point. I don't. Jesus, you know, Jesus was accused of nitpicking of being divisive. So, you know, it's okay for downlet jokes to be divisive. Like, I'm not sure it is.
Well, it depends what you're being divisive about, isn't it? You know, are you channeling Jesus while being divisive? No, they're not. So yeah, he talked about actual and virtual. So he's talking about the internet, fingers of scorn. And then he's again, it's this misunderstanding of the motivations of their critics, which has come up again and all the time. People in comments sort of doing watch parties and watching this is they don't get why we left. It's not for these reasons, but they want to create this stereotype. Here, we're motivated, Nemo, because we want to eat, drink, and be merry.
Oh yes, yeah.
So, wow.
He told us that Zion and Babylon are incompatible, and we are Babylon, obviously.
Yeah, I'm drinking water.
Good.
And it's making me merry. He said, we won't endure sound doctrine, and we are going to seek teachers who will tell us what we want to hear, basically. You know, cool. We're looking for, and again, it's this DesNat suspicion of the apologists, the nuanced members, the people who are finessing the inexcusable to make it a bit more excusable. He's seeing all these people as threats.
Well, he was attacking moral relativism as a concept with a straw man of saying they just want there to be no sin. Complete straw man argument. That's not what moral relativists say. not at all.
No. And this is the mantra of the Desnat-ish
Oh,
Midnight
sorry.
Mormons.
Before you go on there,
Yeah,
I've
go on.
realised I just did something which I get frustrated at others. I said that is not what they're saying, and then didn't qualify it. So what moral relativism actually seeks to do is say that the circumstances of an incident have an effect on the morals of that incident or that occurrence. So the situation in which something occurs has bearing on the morality of that thing. But
I
he was
think
saying
I
no,
would
they just don't
suggest,
want there to be sin.
yeah.
Go on.
I would suggest that perhaps the philosophical school of thought they're more referring to, and this has come up in Fair Mormon's Fair Voice podcast early on and so on, when they had a French philosopher student having a chat with Hannah Syriac, and they discussed all this. This has become a mantra they've spread among themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably more the deconstructionist theories of the French philosophers of the 1970s and the postmodernists, who did say that it's very hard to determine what truth is or what meaning is, because it's all very dependent on language, and language can be understood differently. So there is a school of philosophy that says actually it's really hard to nail down what truth is but that's so niche. This is not why people are leaving Mormonism. It's not
No.
because we've given up morality. They're so black and white, and it's this idea that you're either a Mormon or you're not religious, you're an atheist.
Yeah,
Which you
we're
get
not
in
all
Utah
reading
because those
Descartes.
are your main choices.
Yeah,
Yeah, like smoking on the South Bank
we're
and
not.
drinking
Yeah.
coffee.
We're not all
and
French
discussing it.
postmodernists.
I know, but they literally keep describing people who are skeptical
Yeah.
or leave as that. So I thought that was important. This is why I'm calling him Desnat Goebbels, because he literally ticked off the whole list of Desnat strategies. It is these people are weak, our leaders are infallible. They're making new leaders to make a different version or compromised religion. The people who leave are doing it because they are satanic and evil. They've given up morality and God. It's all the Desnat talking points, all of them. And again, Desnat isn't huge, but it does represent a mindset that is simply fundamentalism, and it is spreading and it's becoming more normal. So it is something we have to talk about. Let's be valiant, let's be fearless. We'll confess Jesus before men. We won't deny Christ, so he won't deny us. It's very motivational. It's like, we're going to be this army of fearless Mormons, unashamed of anything. A God who makes no demands functionally doesn't exist. Suck it up. It's going to be difficult. Live by every word of the gospel or the church. Crowds cannot make right what God has declared to be wrong. We're not intolerant. It's essential to love a child of God with a child with different beliefs. So he suddenly switched tack to tolerance. Love your children if they have different beliefs, which was nice. And quote, there is no, but in a way, what he and Oakes were doing was mapping out, in a sense, a way to be fundamentalists, but make it not harmful. It's okay. There are other kingdoms for these people to go to where they'll be happier. You disagree with your child, but that doesn't mean you change your beliefs. You still be homophobic, even if they're gay. You can do both. And in a way, this is quite an insidious message because it involves cutting off empathy. So, quote, no need to sacrifice truth on the altar of agreeableness or social desirability. And then Zion and Babylon are incompatible. So he's saying we can be nice while being fundamentalist. And quote, let us demonstrate our love of the Lord through wholehearted, voluntary obedience. So again, the obedience, you will obey. Are we caught between our covenants and the world? And yes, you'll be persecuted. You will suffer shame for his name. True. And then this idea that truth is merely a social construct, a quote. Then he sort of references Corihor, nothing is a crime. Beware of wolves in sheep's clothing who are always recruiting and often use their intellectual reservations to cover their own behavioral lapses. That's Nazi ideology.
He talked about moral lapses, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Our morality is in question.
Behavioral, yes. So he's saying that the only reason anyone would have intellectual reservations about literally every policy and doctrine in this church is it's an excuse for our sins. Anyone who disagrees with the ideology must be a homosexual, must be depraved, must be sexually or morally corrupt. That
And once you
it's
dehumanize those people,
Nazism.
once you otherize
Yeah,
them, once
yeah,
you turn them
yeah,
into something that doesn't need the basics
yeah,
of human respect, then makes it very easy for
yeah.
people to rile
Mm,
against them in pretty horrific ways that are pretty
mm,
unchrist-like.
yeah.
But if you can, essentially,
And
it
all
says
of it.
Christ says
Yeah.
love your neighbor. But if you can make these people not your neighbor, then
Mm, yeah.
it becomes open season
I'd
for.
be do you know what? I'd be absolutely fine with all this, is that if every doctrine and policy was literally what Jesus taught, that would be fine. Yes. If this is really the word of God and truth, which they believe, yeah, of course we shouldn't ever compromise. But demonstrably, they don't understand even the basics of what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, you
Mhm,
don't have to dig deep for this stuff. And that's the point, is they have no shade of grey. There is no space for them to differentiate
mhm,
between the bigoted ideas of old white males in socially conservative
yeah.
Utah and the will of the God of the universe. So there is no safety net. There is no healthy protection against fundamentalist literalism. And this is what they're teaching. It's what Wendy's teaching. It's what
Mhm,
President Nelson's teaching. It's what Dallin Oaks is teaching. And we just saw this. They have trained up a generation of
yeah.
people who've absolutely drunk their message
So
and
this
will
speaks
preach
to
it
the
from the
whole,
pulpit.
let's wait
Yeah.
until the next generation come up so that they can make the change. I'm
Mm,
constantly being told, just wait until another generation comes up and they'll be
mm.
more
No,
progressive. No, because this
no,
guy's drinking the
no.
Kool-Aid. He
They are
represents
getting
the
worse.
next
Yeah.
generation.
I
And he
mean, if
knows he'll
anything,
make
if
it
we've
because he
yeah.
talks like this.
Mm. If we've learned anything in the last few years, politically in America, and right now with World War II repeating itself in Ukraine, that the idea that the onward march of civilization always makes the next generation kinder and
Mhm,
gentler, and you can kind of let go of being vigilant against fascistic ideas and totalitarianism. Complete nonsense.
mhm,
It can go very bad, because that's what the lesson of history is. The most advanced scientific and cultured civilization in the world, Germany, before World War One, they were ahead of everyone in every metric of civilization. When became aggressive, degenerate
mhm.
barbarians slaughtering people, and using chemical warfare, and they did it again in the Second World War.
Well,
And
on that
I
cheery
mean,
note,
I've yeah.
I think we do need to move on for the sake
History
of time.
repeats. Yeah.
We need to move on to Elder
So this,
Pace.
yeah, yeah,
Because
and
I
his
think
praise
we've
of the
given a
leaders,
good enough flavor of that. Go watch
yeah,
that talk
yeah,
and just
it's
shake your head.
extraordinary
I thought
and
that Elder Pace's
important.
accent
Yeah.
came and brought some folksy wisdom to bring us back down to
Mm,
earth from what was a very kind of fundamentalist position.
mm,
And he started off pretty normal. Get your own experience of the scriptures. He taught us what we learned from Come Follow Me, and then you realised he was going to start talking about Come Follow Me a lot. He talks about the saints following President Nelson have equal faith to those who experienced the Passover, which is, I feel like those two things aren't necessarily comparable. He talked about some testimonials of Russell M. Nelson, which really just turned out to be testimonials of Come Follow Me. And then at the end, he did a really weird speed up, as though he'd got the little flashing light to say he was running out of time. So it's like he sped through the last little bit of his teleprompter and then finished up. I
mm.
don't really know if there's much else to say about him.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I wrote down was the Lord works through his prophet to protect and save his people. So again, it's not Jesus that's going to save you, it's President Nelson.
Hmm.
They're just slotting President Nelson, the prophet, into where we should be saying Jesus every time. And he just recapped Nelson's promises. He was like, okay, let's review, because he said at the
Hmm.
start, are we moving towards our goal?
Hmm.
Okay, I'm the Sunday school president. We're doing Come Follow Me for a few years now. This is what President Nelson promised. And as I read this, could I invite all listeners to reflect? Has your Come Follow Me study
Hmm.
resulted in this? Number one, is your Sabbath a delight? Number two, are your children excited for the gospel? Number three, has it decreased the adversary's influence in your life? And 4, have you seen dramatic changes for the better? And I would say there's probably been no difference to that to the normal human averages anywhere, because it's what Come Follow Me teaches is proof texting really boring dreck. It doesn't engage you in the scriptures unless you go off piste and do more than the manual says. It is not educational. It doesn't fire you up with the love of the scriptures if you stick with the curriculum, because it's already been, all the interesting bits are left out of each Come Follow Me lesson. So they're promising these things, but they're not delivering.
Okay, let's go on to Suarez, who talked about emotional uplift. He talked about essentially be in awe of the gospel. And someone I want to bring in actually to talk about emotional uplift, because we've had some great conversations about that. And a man I just love bringing into conversations anyway is our friend Julian Heath. Julian, how you doing?
Hey.
Hello.
Hello. So Julian's come back because of some of the announcements that were made later in the session, but he's been sat in the green room looking forlorn. So I thought I'd bring him in and we could talk about Elder Suarez. And I just want to talk about emotional uplift and how that can affect the way people interact with the church. That feeling of the Spirit.
Sorry.
Unleash your Jonathan Haidt on me, please, Julian.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed what you said because my signal cut out for a minute. Yeah, just talking about emotional uplift. Yeah. Well, it's a psychological phenomenon that can be experienced in so many things, not just a religious experience. You know, being out in nature, going to a football match. If you want to see emotional uplift, go to a football match, and you know, and all of the ritual and all of the benefit is there. You know, I remember even if you go and see the Villa, you know, I remember going to my first Villa match with my son, and I was a convert. I thought it was fantastic. Everybody wearing the same uniform, singing the same songs, going through these rituals where you stand at certain points and you know, there's almost like a call and response with the crowd. And by the end of it, everybody in that stadium, well, all of the Villa fans in that stadium, you know, were my best friends, you know, and it's exactly the same thing. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing.
Cool. Right, Julian, I'll bring you back in a few minutes, all right? But I wanted to pull you in on that one. So Elder Suarez, basically, he warned us against apathy. He told us basically to keep the awe, keep that emotional uplift, that good feeling towards the church. He was pretty Jesus focused. He talked about the 2 great commandments, which I think was really interesting. Elder Oakes at the beginning of this as well also talked about the 2 great commandments and put them on equal footing, which I think really kind of cuts the feet out from underneath. I think it was Christopherson who recently was talking about first great commandment is number 1, but we won't get sidetracked with that. Suarez. What else?
Suarez was though also again warning against spiritual apathy. Though the overall framework was again, we're losing people. People are leaving. We're losing them. Sort them out. So he said there was this sequence again. This is his explanation of, don't talk about funk. And then he, so he said, this is what goes on. First of all, we think we have all the knowledge we need, so we stop learning. This cracks me up because most of the people who leave this church have done it because they learnt too much. Then they become indifferent and insensitive to the greatness of the work. Then they have doubts about the truths that we've already received, which makes us vulnerable to the temptations of the adversary. And then we kind of get in the trap, you know, in a complex world. The hope is to learn of me, walk in humility, and we'll get peace. So simple Christ-based stuff, you know, don't get apathetic, stick with it, stick with the basics, great commandments. He used a lot of language that is cliche, and God bless him, English is a second language, so no criticism for that reason. But it just reminded me of how the words we use in our jargon are just really depressing. My mum always used to complain about this: strive, we need to, we must, we should. Strive, we need to, we must, we should. My mum sort of made a vow to stop saying we should do. And Wendy talked about President Nelson actually not wanting to force the human mind, and said he never says you should do this. So I was like, really? He's quite bossy, you know. But you know, I genuinely, I think he is a bit careful with that language. He talks about, you know, inviting people to do something and so on. Bit passive aggressively, but
so there's
you know,
a positive. But yeah, I do want to talk
yeah.
about Funk. I want to talk about Randy Funk, who didn't really live up to his name too much because he kind of just banged on about shepherds and then bragged a little bit about being a pioneer. Anything you got from that particularly?
Fell asleep a bit.
Yeah.
The chosen have faith and follow his prophet. So again, getting the prophet in there. These talks are so repetitive. Honestly, most of them it's have faith, follow the prophet, have faith, prophet, 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 prophet. Quote: inward peace, the inward peace of being securely in the fold of God, which then helps us to cope better when we face challenges. I don't think that's always the case for people. When challenges come, their inward peace gets a bit shattered. Particularly if the challenge is because of a dysfunction in the church. And he said, you know, some people, you know, my great grandfather crossed the plains and he's in, but others of you are still on the plains. And he just encouraged people to continue the journey, you know, keep going to Zion. So that was sweet. That was nice.
Yeah. Awesome. We've just had a very lovely donation from Garden Girl 663. Thank you very much for the.
Oh, there you go. He's run off to spend it, love, already. Like he's like, forget this. This is more money than I've had in years. He's off to get a ticket.
Sorry, I keep ending up getting thrown out of the stream. Apologies about that. Let's go on to. Let's get where the good stuff is.
Silver Fox, baby. Yeah.
He thanked President Nelson for the conference in a really awkward way. Almost, it was like
weird.
A personal favor unto him that Russell M. Nelson had granted this conference. It was bizarre. Yeah. He was like,
"There's tension.
Thank you, President Nelson, for the conference." Yeah, cool. I look forward to hearing from you. Talked about the widow's mite. Doesn't look so good for the church when he framed it the way he framed it.
Yeah.
Because he was talking about, you know, you need to give. It's about giving of what you have. It's not about being wealthy and just giving a little compared to your wealth, which doesn't look good for the church. Uchtdorf likes bike rides with Harriet. If we were writing his Tinder profile, he likes long bike rides through the Utah Valley. So that's quite nice. I also like cycling, so I reconnected with his cycling analogy. Really important that you said success requires falling down a time or two. I thought that's a really good message. Then I let out an audible cheer when he talked about airplanes, as I think a lot of people
can all relate to.
Yes, I did catch him out in a bit of a kind of porcupine, a little bit of a lie, or a bit of a kind of half truth. He said, "Very few will be asked to sacrifice our lives for the Savior or for the church." And it's like, but a lot of us have covenanted to, so yeah, it's kind of like. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But he said, God knows you can't do everything that your heart desires to do. Just do your best. And he said, out of small things proceedeth that which is great, which we've heard earlier in this conference as well. What were your thoughts on Uchtdorf? Anything there that I didn't catch?
Yeah.
Well, I think going over the same again.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think his 2 comments about the finances were quite significant and deserve a bit of a closer look. But otherwise, it was standard, lovely Uchtdorf. The gospel is doable. We're not expecting perfection. Take it a step at a time. Christian Mormonism. Awesome, dude. You know, he gets it still. So I thought, in a way, there are 2 contrasts with the money. The first, where this is the big mistake they make with the widow's mite. He said she gave all of her living. And the donation of the widow's mite represents the standard by which we should all measure our discipleship. And he said the value is not in the effect it had in the treasury, but the effect it had on the donor. Now, this is where the widow's mite thing falls apart. The widow spending her last 2 pennies on the temple coffers was an abomination. It represented the complete ethical collapse of the entire Jewish religion, and Jesus was clear about this. He talked elsewhere about how the Pharisees took away widows' houses because they had this caveat they'd come up with. There are 2, you know, the 10 commandments say you must honor your mother and father. And the way they interpreted that, as they should, is you make sure your parents are looked after in their old age in a world without old age pensions and state welfare. Your obligation is to provide for your mother and father. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees at the temple had come up with this way to take their money by saying if it was declared to be korban or sacred, that children could give their inheritance to the temple instead of giving it to their parents to support them in their old age. So they had an actual sort of a tax evasion fraud from God's sort of shenanigans going on to take money away from the elderly and the widows and put it in the temple instead. So this woman coming to give her last 2 pennies, this is a sin. It represents that her children have failed her. They're not looking after her in old age. She should never have been down to her last 2 pennies. It's an indictment of the temple. If you actually look at the tithing scriptures of the Old Testament, they're very clear. What is tithing meant to be spent on in the Old Testament? 2 things. One is on the full-time temple priesthood because they can't provide for themselves. Absolutely fair enough. Secondly, the poor. The donations to the temple are meant to be literally given to the poor. Tithing itself is meant to be a welfare fund, not an addition. So the fact that this woman came and gave, Jesus obviously commented on her epic faithfulness. But if you take the larger context, this was a disaster. And these apostles keep using that as the example for us all. Give your last penny to the church. So what was the effect her donation would have had on this widow? Well, she went away destitute and probably died in a ditch because she had no money left. No one was looking after her. That was the effect of being that generous to the temple. So, I just think it's really important that we keep challenging this widow's mite narrative because it's being used by the church to rob the poor. And literally the Bible is very clear it should be the other way. The temple should have been giving money to her. But then towards the end, I absolutely loved this from President Uchtdorf. The big frustration about the finance of the church is we now know they've got hundreds of billions of dollars sitting in the American stock market, invested in land, invested in office blocks in London, financial investments, instead of actually being useful. And we keep telling our ward members, do you understand that the money you're giving they don't need? Joseph F. Smith already promised that no one should be charged any more tithing when we can live off the interest of our investments, which we can now. And they're not using it for what they're telling you they're using it for. In Britain, we got 5 million still sitting in the humanitarian aid fund in a bank of 10 years of donations. It's not actually, and they say it doesn't matter what it's spent on. I've had this conversation last week, quite intensively. It doesn't matter. My obligation is to give the money. If they're misusing it, that's between them and God. But I try and say, but Jesus was about being practical. He doesn't give a monkeys about empty sacrifices. He said he doesn't care about sackcloth and ashes if your heart isn't in it. That you're meant to actually help people. You're meant to, in the moment now, don't let tomorrow take care of itself. If there's someone poor in front of you now, you give them your money. That's Christianity. And Uchtdorf, whether intentionally or not, just gave us the mantra for Ensign Peak. Here goes. Quote, consecration, which we commit to as well as sacrifice in the temple. Consecration is different from sacrifice in at least one important way. When we consecrate something, we don't leave it to be consumed upon the altar. In other words, it's not to consecrate isn't you give it and then it doesn't matter what happens to it. The priest can burn it up. It doesn't matter. It's a gift to God. The idea is you suffer and give a bit and don't be worldly. When we consecrate something, we don't leave it to be consumed upon the altar. Rather, we put it to use in the Lord's service. We dedicate it to him and his holy purposes, close quote. And then he talked about how increasing our talents means becoming even more helpful in building the Lord's kingdom. I love that. If they actually practice that with their money or the money we gave them, it would be awesome because they'd use all that money to build the Lord's kingdom, to do the Lord's work, to help people, to help the church survive. We're underfunding our youth programs still, and we're losing all our youth. We've got to compete in the modern world with some high intensity entertainment systems and we haven't raised our game for generations. It's nonsense. You know, we've got to fight for this, and we've got the money to do it. But they won't invest in the members. They won't invest in the youth. They won't invest in us surviving.
But you know what they will invest in?
Temples.
So let's bring Julian back in and talk about Russell M. Nelson, who Russell M. Nelson said this is a historic conference in many ways, then proceeded to not tell us in what way it was a historic conference at all. He said the future is always uncertain, which is interesting coming from a prophet, seer, and revelator. He said we control what we can, which is how we spend our time, which again comes back to almost this cowardice of saying, well, just deal with your personal conflicts. We're not going to call on condemnation of the conflict in Ukraine. We're just going to ask you to deal with your personal stuff. We can't control them. We can't control nations. Just control what we can, right? Which can be a helpful mantra at times, but I think it was being used in a bit of a kind of cowardly way there. He wants us to increase the positive spiritual momentum. He wants to increase the lift, which Uchtdorf talked about in his talk. So Uchtdorf's not completely in the doghouse because President Nelson quoted him. He said we should focus on the temple. We build more temples to keep pace with current church growth. Current church growth is up to 0.8% as of 2021. It was 0.8% that year, which means that it is the second time it's failed to keep up with world population growth 2 years running. It's slightly improved, but COVID has still taken its toll. But because of that, he announced 17 new temples, and I'm going to read where they were now. Wellington, New Zealand, Brazzaville, Republic of the Congo, Barcelona, Spain, Cusco, Peru, Mateo, Brazil, Santos, Brazil, San Luis Potosi, Mexico, Mexico City, Benamorito, Mexico, Tampa, Florida, Knoxville, Tennessee, Cleveland, Ohio, Wichita, Kansas, Austin, Texas, Missoula, Montana, Montpelier, Idaho, Modesto, California. Now you're all saying, oh, he's missed a temple. And it's not one in Utah that I've missed. I have missed the Birmingham United Kingdom Temple. Julian, give me your reaction to that, please.
It was inevitable. I think this is the forerunner for the next announcement, which is that Birmingham is the true site of the Garden of Eden, which we all knew, really, didn't we? We all knew that was the case.
Adam did have a Brummie accent.
Of course he did. He did. No, I thought it was amazing. I thought that what I really thought was amazing, that I didn't realise that that Russell M. Nelson was a Peaky Blinders fan. So we've just had the finale on BBC. He announces a temple in Birmingham. Coincidence? I doubt it.
Not.
Yeah,
I think not. Just for some context, Birmingham as a site for a temple is not going to be in the centre of Birmingham, just in the same way that the London Temple is like miles outside of London. It's likely to be somewhere like Sutton Coldfield, or which is where church offices used to be. It's going to be that sort of neck of the woods, really. But it is less than 100 miles away from the Preston Temple. It's just over 100 miles away from the London Temple. Why do we need a temple in Birmingham, Julian?
Okay, well, the answer to that is we don't. So, I mean, in terms of locations for England, it's a wonderful location because it's kind of right in the middle.
But wouldn't a temple in Exeter be better? Because the poor saints down in Cornwall, it takes them 6 or 7 hours to get to London.
Yeah. So for England, it's a great location. For the UK, no, we don't need it. We don't need it at all. So I don't live in Birmingham anymore. I live in Solihull. That's why I speak really posh now. But what? Why are you laughing?
Oh dear, carry on.
But I was born in Birmingham. I am a proud Brummie. And
Nemo, were you born in Birmingham?
I was not.
No, okay, sorry. I'm going to have to do this, Nemo. Nemo pretends that he's really posh and he's from Oxford. He's not really. Okay, he's from the Midlands. He's from not quite Birmingham, but close enough. Close enough.
The new Birmingham Temple would be like half an hour away from where I grew up, most likely.
I know Dougie offline, right? He talks really posh online. When you speak to him in person, he's all like this. Oh, that was great. That broadcast was great, wasn't it? That's how he speaks normally. He's a proper Peaky Blinder. Yeah, so and now all of my family, so my family are all in Birmingham, and the majority of them are active members, and they are going to be so happy, and that's great. And I don't want to poo on their parade, but firstly,
it's going to ruin their life.
It's probably not going to get built. If we look at what's been going on in terms of these temple announcements, it's kind of like let's not build. Let's just announce them. Let's just announce loads of temples and just not build them. I think of all the ones that have been announced, only a handful have actually under construction.
There's 44 under construction. He's announced like over 70.
Yeah, so I mean that's more than I thought actually, but there's a good chance it's not going to happen, certainly not for a very long time. So I think that's important to note. Also, as you said correctly, Nemo, it's not going to be in Birmingham. It's very, very unlikely that we're going to have a temple in West Brom or something like that. It will be in
a temple in West Brom.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
We've got a lot of Americans.
Villa Park. I've already mentioned it.
Describe what Birmingham is, just for people who don't know.
There's a lot of Americans in the chat. Julian has a Birmingham accent,
Birmingham. From Birmingham, from Julian's heart, tell us what Birmingham is.
Birmingham is the second largest city in England. It's an industrial city. It's got more canals than Venice. That's a great claim. And it's very industrial, and I love it, but it's probably not the best site for a Mormon temple.
But judging by crime rates go down according to Russ M. Nelson where temples are built. So therefore, I think Birmingham City Council had a word with the church and said, "Could you send us one of those temples? I hear it reduces crime rates."
No, it was the Shelby's. Shelby's pulled some strings. Made it happen.
But it's interesting that Birmingham Stake, which is likely to be the large kind of catchment from which they draw a lot of the regular attendees, other stakes like Lichfield will also be involved. But Birmingham Stake, over the past 10 years, has lost 40% of its members, bums on seats. It's the largest decline of any stake in the UK for numbers over the past 10 years, 2010 to 2020. So why are they building a temple there?
Well, not because they need it. Not because they need it. It's not like everybody in the UK is going to be really... no, they're not all going to be excited, actually, because they're going to be a lot of people that are pretty cheesed off by it, especially people from Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. They're going to be thinking, really? That's just not necessary.
Yeah, Northern Ireland, that's a really good point. If you look at the British Isles, right, and the UK, there's a main island, Great Britain is the main island, and then there's another little island called Ireland, and in the north of that is Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, right?
Not complicated at all.
Not complicated at all. But the British Isles, which is the whole, and they all rely on the temples, there are people still that have to take a boat or a plane to get to the temple still within the British Isles. Those people have not been thought about when they've said, "Oh, well, let's just put another one within 2-hour driving distance of the other two temples," right? It doesn't help.
Yeah, absolutely. There is no. It's not like people are trying to get into London and Preston thinking, "Oh man, it's just so hard. It's just so hard to get there." And whenever I go there, it's just packed. I can never get on a session. So many people. They're all queuing up outside trying to get in the temple. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So why are they building it? Well, if they build it, they're building it probably for the reason that you just said, aren't they? They're building it because the Birmingham Stake is dying because so many people are leaving. I moved. Laura and I used to be. Laura, by the way, is gutted. She was really, really hoping for an Essex temple. She was there, fingers crossed. Come on, this is my time.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm I'm a 5-minute ferry ride from Essex. That would be awesome.
Well, yeah,
Not that
that'll be next then. So
40 minutes to London.
we used to be in the Coventry stake. I don't really know what the figures are like for the Coventry stake, but we moved into Birmingham stake because Solihull ward, the ward that we belong to, was actually moved from Coventry into Birmingham because it was struggling so much especially for priesthood holders. They weren't able to fulfil all their callings, so they took the Solihull ward off of the Coventry stake and put it in the Birmingham stake. Then Laura and I moved in, and they lost about 60 members in about 3 weeks. I don't think it was because of us. I think it was all to do with the moving the church offices. But yeah, it really, really is struggling. So I guess that there might be some thinking of, well, let's put it there. And it is kind of in the middle. And then maybe that will help to boost membership.
I just want to draw attention to what is seemingly the most American comment of the night. Says, especially given that there is one just up the freeway in Greater Manchester. I don't know where to start with that.
I love that freeway
just
journey.
Up the freeway, that M6 motorway is an absolute nightmare. Any sort of traffic and your day's over. And also, I don't think Preston is in Greater, or Chorley particularly. I don't think is in Greater Manchester. It is in Lancashire, but thank you anyway, Lamb Chop, for that.
Yeah, we do like to misname our temples, don't we?
Yeah, Preston Temple, but not in Preston. London Temple is in. It's not even in the same county.
Godstone,
it's in
it was
Lingfield in Surrey. Yeah, it's in Surrey, so it's not even in. It's not even in the Greater London area. It's
way out
outside
in the countryside.
Yeah, which quite right.
Yeah,
but
there is absolutely no need for it. It will bring if they do actually get round to building it. Sorry, it's for me. It's just so silly. And what was really interesting was that as soon as it was announced, one of my good friends who is an active member of the church, but he's quite nuanced in thinking, kind of messaged about it and said, it's a joke. It is a joke. And I think for anybody that, you're going to have a lot of people that are really elated by the whole announcement. But then you're going to have a lot of people that are a little bit more, dare I say, clued up to what's really going on, who are going to be angry about this, and rightly so. All of this talk about how we've got all of this money and why aren't we using it properly, and we're building a temple where it's just not needed. If they do get around to
most
building
of the others as well.
Yeah, I'll be really interested when they do get around to building it. I'll be interested to see what the opening hours will be. It's not going to be open.
It'll be a micro temple. I reckon it'll be a micro temple as an appendage to Star City. You'll be able to see it from Spaghetti Junction, which any American viewers, Google Spaghetti Junction, your mind will be blown by the complexity of that intersection.
You can do a session, do an endowment, and then go and do laser tag straight afterwards. I think that's perfect.
Brilliant. That's what we want to do. So all these temples are just being announced. Wellington, New Zealand. I know, Peter, you reached out to someone to say
yes,
to find out what the situation is there.
Yeah. So my awesome contacts, one of them, the once Bishop of New Zealand's Prime Minister, who left the church because of its homophobia, says, I think temples are the new retirement plan of the church. Oldies will do revolving rotations around the world. But what we're already hearing from Utah and Deseret is they've run out of people. They are begging elderly people to go and serve to keep these temples open. It's a disaster. They won't be able to staff them. And to be specific about the situation in Wellington, Wellington has 3 stakes which are barely functional. Our stake has 5 wards, 3 of which are branch size. The church is shrinking dramatically in New Zealand, which it is here as well. And we already have a temple in Hamilton and one in construction in Auckland. Who is going to fill these things? They will be a ghost town. And my other contacts, the options are, he's speculating why this is Gina Colvin's hubby Nathan. The preparation for the millennium, a tax write-off. There's about to be a big membership growth spurt. They're going to open the coffers and pay people to attend. Retirement plan for the oldies, or ensuring proximity for the next big thing, e.g. World War III, a pandemic, and no aircraft fuel. You're just scrabbling around for reasons. There is a reason this is happening. So a year or so ago, and this has been talked about a lot of people, one of my listeners reached out and said they have a relative on the temple committee. They say Nelson is obsessed. He turns up for every meeting of the temple committee, and he has told them to build 1,000 temples, like literally 1,000 temples. And I thought, yeah, I believe that because he's delusional. But then I was like, really? Because, there'll come a point where it just looks ridiculous. We're at that point, everybody, because we've already discussed how in the last two conferences, he's announced temples in Oslo in Norway, in Brussels in Belgium, in Austria now. Austria has
Vienna.
2 states. Oslo has 2 states. Norway has
it's like
2
500
states.
people.
And these people already, and these people already have easily commutable temples. The same in Britain. There aren't the pit. This is how Rusty is going to be remembered. His destruction of the temple, the Salt Lake Temple, which he's destroyed, and his destruction through spamming the world with temples. This will kill off the church faster than anything else could. The only hope in our rapidly shrinking wards to stabilize and grow is we have to have some miracle of missionary work and a miracle of ministering to our active and less active members and to our youth to keep them active. To do that is going to take every spare minute of every active member's life. And by plonking a temple in the middle of these places and these communities, they will suck up all the available, particularly mature or available because they're retired at awkward times of the day, workforce. The missionary work will collapse. It's already collapsing because we're short of missions, and the ministering will collapse. Because if in any way they're going to be realistic about maintaining these buildings, they're not going to just shove the more mature elderly membership in there with time availability. They're going to have to direct a lot of the missionaries, the young people, towards temple missions instead of proselyting ones.
Doing what I did, and he has been
of a temple mission.
Yeah. And they've been talking about service missions or proselytizing missions, and I think there will be personally a shift in the church. To be honest, I think they'll give up on trying to bring people in through missionary work. I think they're just going to turn into, well, missionaries will go out and do a bit of service with the odd bit of trying to bring people into the church in between. Julian, you had a point. You raised your hand. Please.
Yeah, and just on that as well, again, we're having something which we haven't had for a long time, which is this encouragement to have lots of children as well, because that's going to be our main source of growth, isn't it? Really, realistically. I just wanted to say on the whole point of what's the whole point of building these temples. So as you're saying, Peter, there is the legacy element of it, isn't there? So Russell.
Well, he's competitive with Hinckley. He wants to win.
Yeah. So it's part of his legacy. So
he's already surpassed him.
Yeah, but there's also that it really helps to create this illusion of growth, which I find really interesting. I'd love to be able to talk to people about this. If only my active family members would talk to me about this kind of thing. I'd love to have a conversation, because obviously they're not going to see the figures. And there's no discussion of it at conference. They're not going to say at conference, well, we are seeing a drop in membership. So it's very easy for them to promote this illusion of growth, except for the fact that they can see it now. We're at a level where they can see it, where they sit in the pews and they look around and they can see that the numbers are dwindling. They can see everybody, and especially in the UK. Well, I don't know about especially in the UK, but certainly in the UK, where it is such a small community, everybody knows people that have left. I remember growing up, there being one person, a small group of people that left the church, and it was this massive thing because we just didn't see it, certainly not adults that kind of made this conscious decision. I used to believe, I don't believe anymore. But everybody must be seeing that kind of thing now. So how do you maintain that illusion of growth when everybody can see the reality. Build loads of temples, maybe, I don't know.
Build loads of temples and tell people the reason you're building temples. And I quote, "We build more temples to keep pace with church growth." So if you tell people that there is a correlation, it's a total lie.
Let's just call it what it is. That is a lie. That is a lie. He's not stupid. You know, if he's going to all of these meetings, he must know that the numbers are dropping. So that is just a lie.
It is.
He must know that these temples. Like I say, if you want to believe that, go to the London Temple, go to the Preston Temple, or any temple. You're going to see that it's not. We need these because of the extra demand. That's just nonsense. It's a barefaced lie.
It is. It's
somebody that should know better.
He should know better.
Is there a Birmingham mission? Is there a Birmingham mission?
So there is, and it had, funnily enough, the London South mission in the UK closed.
Because
it's
doomed.
My mission,
the Birmingham mission. Yeah, that was my mission too.
Yeah.
So
they'll kill it.
Birmingham mission took it over.
Yeah. The mission I served in, the Florida Tallahassee mission, which had Northern Florida, South Alabama, they closed the mission and then announced a temple for Tallahassee. I mean, that just is it in a nutshell. The emperor has no clothes, and it's not just that Nelson has no clothes. He is barking mad. Like, this is literally insanity. Why has nobody in that church office building retired him or told him to stop? Because it's not just being madness, it's now looking like madness. Even the Utah temples that get announced, everyone says this is a podunk corner of nowhere. It doesn't need a temple. And here's the tragedy, because I want the church to survive. I want it to survive. My family have worked hard at this for generations. And they could buy members. They think, all we've got money to buy is temples. So we'll just spam the world with temple. They've got the money to buy temples because they're utter geriatric lack of imagination. They don't understand how they could use their vast wealth to radically reform this church and to offer a product that people would flock to. They can afford to hire the best safeguarding trainers on earth for everyone everywhere. They can afford the best scholars and experts to create a teaching curriculum that will be fascinating, engaging, forward-thinking, relevant. They could hire people to actually have the skills to sort out the mission program, which is still running to the ground, and Uchtdorf seems to have done nothing to save it except keep cancelling chapters of Preach My Gospel. Everything is falling apart and failing. They've got the money to fix it all. They could throw money at youth programs to make them engaging in positive spiritual ways, not just like expensive trips to Disneyland or something. They could invest in members.
Chocolate fountains in every chapel, not proper ones, not those little ones that you could buy from Argos, but proper built-in.
They've got money to put a temple in every town in Scotland of the size of Salt Lake City. You know, I literally did number crunching on that one. Every tiny town in Scotland could have a temple. But what else? They could give our money back, as Nemo's petition says. You don't need our tithing, so let us have some of that money back or use our own to become the most powerful charitable engine in our local communities. That would speak volumes about our Christianity and make us attractive. We could reform so much stuff with the money if they had any imagination about how to use that vast resource. But they're not. They're tinkering and closing missions and alienating the young. So we've got ever decreasing numbers of missionaries. There's no way the church can grow anymore. And
I have thought of another reason.
That's the problem. Julian, please.
Nemo. Yes. So the other reason why they're building all these temples is because Jesus is coming again.
Well, there's that.
That will be what a lot of people will think when they see that there is no current need for them. I imagine again that will just.
And he has to have accommodation options.
Yeah, well, it just place for his friends to stay over. But seriously, that's what people will think. They'll think, well, these are the last days. We need all these temples because Christ is going to reign for 1,000 years, and there's going to be temples everywhere, and we're going to do all of this work for the dead, and they're going to be coming down because they're dead, but they'll come down and say, "Oh, can you do work for me?" and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's another reason why people think, we should have a temple.
Absolutely. So it's been a wild ride, this General Conference. The 192nd Annual General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints did not disappoint in its just craziness at times, and its banality
Heavenly
at others.
Mother.
Right?
Heavenly Mother is dead.
They killed off Heavenly Mother. They put a temple in amongst the Brummies, and Dallin H. Oaks basically told the trans community where to stick it because I think he's fed up with them lighting up the Y. And on that note, I'm going to tell you that Julian can be found over with Sunstone when you do see him online.
Sunstone Conference coming up in October this year in Birmingham, next to the temple.
Exactly. It's where it's all happening.
That's why they're doing it.
Yeah,
it's all happening in Birmingham.
You can find Peter at Mormon Civil War. He promises us that he will eventually get another video out at some point, and he's working hard to do so. If you like this video, if you liked what we've done this weekend, please subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in 6 months' time for another harrowing, punishing, sleepless weekend, just so you don't have to watch conference.
Wow.
Have a great evening, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your conference weekend, and I'll see you in a week or two. Bye.
Bye.